Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different media, books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only talk about these things in terms of the writing. Anything like acting, animation, art, etc. is out unless it relates directly to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, secretly a dragon, and also your host. And today I'm joined by John Kernan once more as we embark on our third episode of our cycle on drama. Our topic for this episode being The Witcher.
Oh, I love The Witcher.
It's very good, and apologies in advance if my voice sounds off to you. Literally seconds before hitting record, my throat decided to start having a conniption.
I know that feeling all too well.
I'll do my best to keep it in check and edit out all the throat clearing.
Yeah, and my throat is just stupid and damaged to begin with, and I just ate, so I'm probably gonna be doing my fair share.
So, for those who don't know, The Witcher is a franchise with a really long history. It started as a series of novels and short stories written by Andrei Sapkowski beginning in the mid 80s, actually starting with a submission to a short story contest. And as of the time of this episode, there are 15 short stories, 6 novels, a movie, and 2 TV adaptations, 3 major video games, and several comic books. I had no idea about the Hexa movie and TV series, and as best as I can tell, most people would rather live in blissful ignorance of those as well.
Who would have thought that, like, the fantasy media landscape, but also the vibe of, like, video games, especially narrative and open world ones, would be changed forever, specifically by a grumpy old Polish man who's a genius writer, hating video games and being like, "Leave me out of it."
Yeah, I mean, apparently a lot of choices he made in writing The Witcher were based on things he didn't like about other fantasy stories.
Yeah, it's so funny. He's like, this man made a masterful deconstruction of multiple things, but not even really for the best motivation. Like, yes, he wanted to give people alternatives to that stuff, but also he was kind of being spiteful and cranky as he did it too.
Yeah, when I was doing my research for this, I saw a thing. It was like, yeah, basically Yennefer exists because Sapkowski was annoyed about how easily heroes in fantasy media get the girl or girls plural, and he was like, "Nah, this fucker's gonna have to work for it."
And also, we're not even 100% sure she's good for him for a big chunk of it either.
Yeah,
She's she's far from a Yennefer's far from a perfect little princess. In fact, like, despite the fact that we see her flaws, I would say people who only see her in the 3rd Witcher game or in the Witcher show are really missing a lot of context for the fact that Yennefer's not a great person. Like, she doesn't seem like a great person in the stuff I mentioned either, but, she does a lot more mean and nasty or just plain selfish, greedy, bad things in the books.
yeah.
All the sorceresses do. It's I man, it's this is a thought I have in my head a lot, and it's kind of a dumb thought because it's too narrow to be like a proper thought experiment. But there are so many like great expansive worlds and stories I look at, and probably partially because of our whole conversation about Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings, I just think back and I'm like, what if I could see this author and J.R.R. Tolkien just sitting in a room having a chat for a
It would
while?
definitely be interesting. I mean, apparently Poland hold him in similar regard, if not higher than Tolkien. So
That makes sense. Not a lot of I mean, I at least haven't encountered a lot of, like, internationally acclaimed, like, world beloved stories from there. Not because 'cause I'm sure Poland has plenty of great writing, but, Poland is very small.
yeah. Now, before we get too deep into it, a bit of context for this. So, personally, I have read one of the short story collections. I've seen one season of the Netflix series, and I have absorbed some content about the games, which I desperately want to play. I just have to find the time on YouTube and from John. And John, I believe, is mostly familiar with the games.
I am mostly familiar with the games. I've done a little bit of reading. I loved the first season of the show, other than a couple things that made me go, "Huh?" And then fell off of the second season almost immediately. It wasn't doing it for me.
Yeah, so we do very much like this massive sprawling world and franchise, but we're coming at it from slightly different places, and both of us do have a somewhat patchwork knowledge. So bear with us. We're maybe a little less well informed about some of the Witcher stuff than we are about other franchises we pursue in this series. And
Yes.
for those of you who aren't super familiar with The Witcher yourself, basically the Witcher franchise follows primarily Geralt of Rivia, the eponymous Witcher.
The
Witches
Butcher
are
of Blaviken.
that poor guy. We're gonna get into that. Uh, the witches are essentially people who have been mutated to be supernaturally gifted for the purpose of hunting supernatural monsters, more or
Yeah.
less. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but my full understanding of that lore is a little spotty.
Monsters are such a prevalent thing in this world that the average person killing them with just swords and armor is tough enough that there needed to be a group of people specialized in killing monsters, or society probably never would have been built up the way it was, or it would have taken, like, way longer. Like, I feel like the world of The Witcher without witchers would have gotten to the year we are currently in right now in the real world and still looked medieval.
Quite possibly. But something worth noting there, from my limited understanding, I don't think they actually started as monster hunters. I believe the original purpose was just experiments to see if they could create soldiers who were equally gifted in swordplay and spellcraft. And when that produced witches, there was a bunch of other stuff I don't know too much about, and the witcher schools were eventually formed and shifted their focus to be these neutral monster hunters.
Could be. A lot of people also don't know that, the monsters of the Witcher world are, despite, pretty much universally being based off of various grim-esque fairy tales and such, are not native to this world at all. They're essentially aliens. I
I did know that. I learned about that recently in my
I forget what
research.
it was called. It was like, what, The Convocation of Worlds or something like that? I forget the title because 'cause I've only heard it a couple times.
Yeah,
But,
I'm not sure.
at some point, there was basically a cataclysmic event that basically tore not even the fabric of reality, but, like, you could say the barrier between dimensions, the whatever fabric it is that separates parallel existing worlds from each other, and just allowed a bunch of stuff from other much darker, more alien and awful worlds to come into this one. And, unfortunately, those creatures that came, also had ways of spreading and reproducing by themselves as invasive species, so they hung around and became part of the world.
Yeah, witches basically are glorified. Well, glorified is a strong word, but basically pest control. But glorified is a strong word because, unfortunately for them, they also tend to be very feared and persecuted because of their power and their otherness.
Yeah, as a result of being both kind of the Dark Ages and also being a world where people could be preyed on by inhuman monsters at any moment in the middle of nowhere, uh, people are extra afraid of and uncomfortable with the idea of any sort of other in this world. It's all the same stuff you're used to in real life, but dialed up to 11 because people have so many more genuine and real reasons to be afraid of stuff that, they also heavily dial up the bad reasons to be afraid of stuff.
Yeah. And that's actually the crux of a lot of The Witcher in general, as a franchise. Like, surface level, it might seem like an odd choice for a drama-focused episode, but while The Witcher is a fantasy franchise about monster slaying and it has plenty of actions, it is a drama, both in the broad official definition we talked about in episode 1 of this season, and our more focused one as well that we also discussed in that episode. That more focused one, of course, being to say that the story of The Witcher is largely character driven. It is a story with a narrative that is driven by people more than by plot events.
Yeah.
It's about Geralt finding his place in this world that, by and large, despises him, the connections he forms with his fellow outcasts, and how he interacts with the world and the world with him.
Yeah, it's very easy to miss that the title of The Witcher is actually even more literal than it sounds. Like, it's it's not about the only Witcher, and it's not about a Witcher. It is about the Witcher, Geralt of Rivia. He is permanently the main character, and almost every single story centers around him, and what few stories don't directly follow him, directly follow somebody close and connected to him and who affects him instead.
Yeah, that man does have a knack for finding himself at at least tangentially attached to like every major historical event of his era, and he fucking hates it.
Yeah, both his critical strength and flaw of being a witcher is that, he's just kind of a really kind and caring person, which, you'd be like, "Oh, haha, it's kind of a flaw to be kind, right?" And it's like, well, in this case, kind of, yeah, for the most part, a lot of witchers are cold and detached because of their mutations, but also kind of out of practicality because they are a group that nobody loves, most people don't even like, but everybody needs, which means the world sees them as grimy, unsavory tools, which,
At
not only
best,
puts
a
them at r
necessary evil at worst.
yeah, which not only puts them at risk if they're kind, but more specifically, makes them more palatable targets to be used as tools constantly, all the time, which means a deep down, kind, caring guy like Geralt cannot catch a break or have a moment of rest. There's just always something going on that he's getting pulled into.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing about Geralt is that whilst he is gruff and he is somewhat pragmatic, and he comes off as a very stereotypical stoic badass to the people around him often, and probably to the audience at first, especially in like the Netflix version. The reality is that he is far, far kinder than he appears. He is a very just, fair, kind, and overall good person. He's plenty happy to kick some ass and he'll kill a guy if he has to, but he would rather help both people and monsters both than harm them if that is all possible. And that makes it really, really difficult for him to exist as a Witcher in the world he exists in. And that is a really interesting perspective to follow.
Yeah, it's always fun following him and the stuff he gets to, and I do also like because that difference helps put into context the reputation for the Witchers. Because it's also really easy for the story misleading you and to be like, "Why do witchers have such a bad reputation? Why does everybody think they're so cold and mean? Is it just because none of these people have gotten to know Geralt?" And it's like, no, it's because they've had experience with other witchers, and you don't realize until you meet some of the other ones that, they're not like Geralt.
I mean, it is also to an extent that most people don't meet witches.
That's true. I guess I just mean, you finally meet, I'm forgetting some of their names, but especially that one who's an old friend of Geralt's, but kinda young. You meet him and you're like, "Oh, he's most of the bad things people say about witchers."
Is that Letho?
No, Letho's cool.
But he is another Witcher who is somewhat of the antagonist for the second Witcher game.
No, some of the other guys from the School of the Wolf. Not Vesemir, obviously. Vesemir's chill, but Vesemir's also old as hell.
Hmm. But yeah, like the witches, they are powerful, but they are also ultimately a very misunderstood minority group in this world.
Yeah, and unfortunately, their power doesn't extend as far as you might think. Individually, they are strong and powerful people, but not only does their power not expend beyond that at all because of the stuff we said about them being misunderstood and a minority and di disrespected, unloved, they have no political power or influence, they don't have a land of their own, but one of the biggest things is even though individually they're powerful, with the power scaling of this world, still not that powerful, actually. A lot there every Witcher has to deal with the fact that there's a lot of things and people out there stronger than them, including, you know, people with inherent magical, powerful, or in innate power intense enough that, they could just look at you and make you explode into giblets if you made them mad enough.
Those are also in the minority, to be fair. It's mostly the problem is dealing with, from my understanding, I mean, monsters of various varieties obviously are range from quite pitiful to dragons.
Well,
But
yeah, but also those magic people, unlike the Witchers, do wield political influence and clout.
exactly, and that's one of the things I was about to say is that honestly, the one of the biggest differences, the biggest problems is that political power more than anything. One Witcher is not worth an army,
Nope.
and that means that people in power with armies can persecute them at will, make tools of them, and that is a very common occurrence because it's easy,
It's
to be
very easy.
frank. And it's not like the situation with sorceresses and sorcerers, usually sorceresses, thanks to the lodge, who are they have magical power, yes, but they are not so obviously other and alien as the witches. They are ultimately just appear human and often are pretty women, which means it's very easy for them to to sort of wiggle their way into political circles through a combination of politics, cunning, spell work, and just weak-minded dudes around them.
And if you're sitting here wondering like, "Oh, wow, does magic just make you pretty? Why are all the sorceresses pretty?" It's because they want to be. It's not because the
Yeah.
magic makes them inherently pretty. It's because magic in this world is basically whatever the person using it wants to be if they're powerful and creative enough, which means, people who are decently strong in magic look however they want to look.
Yeah, and these sorceresses basically use a combination of just spell work and being very charismatic, pretty people to weasel their way into the political circles of the rulers of this world, the various royal families and things like that, which are kingdoms, which are naturally typically ruled by men, kings, because this is a medieval fantasy world and shit just tends to be like that.
They even managed to make big deals all around where essentially every ruler of every nation on the entire continent has a sorceress as an advisor.
And most of these sorceresses are from,
The Lodge.
yes, are from the Lodge, which is basically this sort of secret society of sorceresses, and they play these kingdoms for their own game. And at this point, I think it's probably becoming clear why we talk about this and go, yes, it is a drama. It is a very character driven franchise because most of the major events in the narrative are built around human drama, be it political manipulation and conflicts, personal grievances and feuds, or even romantic entanglements. Often all of the above.
Yeah, sorceresses are horny.
People in general tend to be. And that can be problematic. It can be played to advantage, and people are willing to make use of that. But that's one of
Yeah,
but that's not even it's not specifically just the romantic entanglements, it's just all of these things in general, these very human things, despite it being a fantasy story about, mutated people and monster hunting on the surface, are what drives so much of the plot.
and a big part of why these sorceresses are so relevant isn't just because of the politics. or because fantasy and magic, or even because Geralt knows most of them, or eventually all of them, which he does. Spoiler alert. But also, uh, I forgot what I was building up to earlier when I mentioned Tolkien. The world of The Witcher takes a very similar view in many ways on power to Lord of the Rings, in that a the biggest part of why we always see mages, especially sorcerers and sorceresses, riled up and wrapped up in all this stuff isn't just because they have the ability to be. It's because magic comes with it in this world, the literal will to power. The very fact that you have magic inside of you literally compels you to seek more power, which is why almost every single sorceress you will ever meet is a selfish, power-hungry sneak.
But I mean, they're usually in good company because by virtue of being power-hungry sneaks who get involved in political circles and things like that for the purpose of building more power for themselves and their lodge, they're usually surrounded by royalty and noble people and high society who are typically power-hungry sneaks.
Yep, because that's how you get ahead, by playing the game.
And that is what so much of the story of The Witcher really revolves around. It's these political power struggles and personal feuds that Geralt, because despite how he appears, uh, because he is such a ultimately kind person, gets wrapped up in because he cannot help. Even though he gets irritated by it, he cannot help but try to do the right thing in a scenario where he has the power to help.
Yeah, he always ends up involved in that stuff regardless, because he's saying no is not his strong point. Or I should say, he's actually really good at saying no until the second he genuinely believes someone needs his help, and then suddenly he's terrible at it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a pragmatic side to him. Like he's not, he doesn't work for free
That's a
if
rule
he
of the
can
Witchers.
avoid it.
Witchers are not allowed to work for free.
It's I think that's part of how they're supposed to maintain their neutrality. But by the
Yeah.
same token, he often does work for free because he can't help but step into a situation and help.
Yeah, group of witchers all sitting there, everybody being like, "All right, how much have y'all made? Have you brought your contributions to the school or whatever? Remember, we're not charity cases." And at the word charity cases, Geralt just looks down at the ground.
I mean,
No, definitely
it's not like he only works free. Like if he picks up a contract, he expects payment, and unfortunately doesn't always get it because people are horrible to witches. But it's just a matter of sometimes he gets involved in a situation that isn't a contract, and in those situations, he can't just demand payment. That'd be messed up.
Yeah. But, that is where we come into something that is actually a really big thing in the Witcher world, and I'm really annoyed that I can't remember the proper title, right now, but it's like, it's the rule of gifts, or the rule of the future, or something like that, where, something we forgot to mention sooner, I guess I should say I did, is, fate is like a real tangible thing in the world of The Witcher. It's not something people can easily see or manipulate, but it is something that is proven to exist and not just be a metaphysical concept. And part of that manifests itself of something Witchers often do, which has a a massive impact on the story in Geralt. Is if somebody can't provide suitable compensation to you for something, you can essentially accept a deal where the person promises to give you something they don't have yet, or don't know when they will have in the future. And that is basically a promise written in fate that more or less destines you to get that later, even if you don't know what it is, which is exactly how Geralt ends up with Ciri.
Yeah, it's a it's basically a prophesized IOU.
Yeah, it's an IOU enforced by destiny.
Yeah, which the thing is, like, Geralt would agree to all these things and then never go back to claim it if he could. But unfortunately, the world is like, the way the laws of the universe are written, one way or another, you're going to receive this payment.
Like, no, the promise is kept. It's seeing the way that stuff twists around is interesting too. I wish I had the title immediately off my head so I could look up some of it while we were talking. Because although Siri
Yeah.
is obviously the biggest example of it in the story, she's not the only one. It is like a quantifiable thing that happens. When you make that promise, it will happen eventually.
Before we do get to Ciri, though, and other important characters aside from Geralt, because I think this will be a good jumping point. I think we need to talk about something else about Geralt's character that is important to note because it drives a lot of his interactions with people. We talked about earlier on that a lot of the narrative is built around Geralt finding his place in the world and the connections he forms with other outcasts. And that is a really important element of this franchise and of Geralt as a character, because being a Witcher and being Geralt specifically is a very lonely existence a lot of the time. And that's why through a lot of the story, especially earlier stories before he's made all these connections, he spends a lot of time in like brothels and things like that just because it lets him have a human connection for a bit.
Yeah, it's a pretty frequent thing with Witchers because even though most of them are a lot more genuinely cold and not and not as emotional as Geralt, they still feel it. They still need it. They still feel, lust, loneliness, the need for connections, both emotional and physical, and like they're most of the time they're not going to get it anywhere else.
And this isn't just a trait that belongs to Geralt. A lot of the most important characters in the Witcher franchise are similarly other and alone. Yennefer was disfigured and mistreated. As a result, spent a lot of her life being a second class citizen, then came into power in the lodge, came into beauty in the lodge even because of her power, and found she's still other and ostracized, even if she is in these political circles now and wields all this power, both political and literal. She's still apart from everyone, and that drives a lot of her character as well. The character of Ciri is, by definition, other because of who she is, and we're definitely going to get into lots about her, I'm sure.
Yeah, Siri is like all other than the fact that she's not a Witcher, she's
She's
many of
working on it.
many of the things we have said about Geralt so far apply to Ciri, but dialed up to 11 because she was born wrapped up in all this shit.
There's other lodge characters like Triss and Philippa, I guess. Same stuff applies.
Ah, yes, a good old Philippa Eilhart. What a nice lady.
All oh yeah, so kind. Uh, all of the the Scoia'tael, is it?
Yeah.
The elves.
Oh, yeah. By the way, also for anyone who doesn't know, this is a world that used to be ruled by elves. In fact, I don't remember for sure. It could be possible that humans actually only came into this world later through a similar convocation of planes or whatever to how monsters got into the world, which would be why we are seen as violent invaders and part of why the elves hate us so much. Also, because uh, there's not a lot of elves around anymore. Humanity kind of didn't share.
As humanity tends to do. But yeah, the elves are also this ostracized other who cling to each other and the remains of their ruined kingdoms.
Yeah, I find the elves in The Witcher so interesting because I genuinely get torn between multiple different feelings on them, partially because like, I like elves. They're one of my favorite fantasy races. I like most variations of elves and usually think they're cool. And the ones in this world are cool, but, it's one of those cases where the mutual hatred between the races is essentially justified on both sides because although it sucks that we showed up and essentially kicked them out, killed a bunch of them, and took everything, the elves of this world also suck and were super racist and don't see humans pretty much as people and like hated our guts from the moment we showed up and would have done the exact same thing to us. They just lost.
Yeah. Um, and of course, there is the various princesses, noblewomen born during an eclipse who were all ostracized unfairly because of a prophecy that may or may not be bullshit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. The main thing of one of the Witcher 3 DLCs revolves around one of them, actually. Yeah. Some madman that people for some reason gave some credence and respect to a long time ago had a crazy psychotic doomsday vision and was like, "Ah, women born under the black sun are monsters. They're born evil. They'll be evil forever, and everything they do will always turn bad and be evil." And everyone went, "Oh shit! Another excuse for a witch hunt? Let's get them."
It was a specific eclipse, though, right? That he predicted was coming X number of
Yeah,
years into the future or something. Yeah.
he predicted that the eclipse would come and that every single girl born on the day of that eclipse, under that eclipse, would be cursed and evil deep down in her heart.
I think it's
And
supposed to just be like royal noble girls, right?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And the big bummer is because he was right about when the eclipse would happen, everybody believed him about the rest of what he said too.
Yeah, like it's hard to say, right? And Geralt often brings attention to this, I've noticed.
Geralt hates these kinds of prophecies.
Yeah, is that like it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because by mistreating all these girls because they were born under this prophecy, they basically push them to become the monsters that they are seen as, which is kind of the big crux of one of the Witcher 3 DLCs, as you mentioned. And I mean, we can probably talk a bit more about that, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that all of these key players have this otherness and loneliness to them as a recurring thing, and that's one of the things that lets Geralt, who is so kind, connect to these important figures because of that empathy, that ability to relate to what they experience.
Yeah, Geralt, besides feeling kinship with people in these types of situations, is also himself like the exception that proves the rule, you could say, of self-fulfilling prophecies. Because he's not all of the bad things that are Witchers supposed to be, even the bad things that are canonically generally true about Witchers. Uh, but he still has to live with the consequences of that. He still has to deal with everyone thinking that. And between the fact that his job leads him to see every side of humanity, good and bad, anyways, whether he likes it or not, and his own personal position, he can't help but feel the connection with people going through these similar things because he's unlike most people who go through these things, he's seen it from every angle, not just the victim angle, and he truly deeply understands for it and feels for all the people involved.
See, that's one of the things that makes The Witcher so good. And I think this is something that fantasy writers should always note, is that by making so much of the story character driven and revolve around these themes of otherness, ostracization, loneliness, just perception of the other, and these complicated webs that these relationships form, it makes it a much more engaging story than if it was just an empty story about monster slaying. By making, despite its fantastical nature, despite it not always being about humans, it is a very human story, and that makes it so much easier for us to connect to as an audience.
Yeah, and it's easy to misunderstand us using the term human here as an adjective because these aren't all humans, but like really it's just because using the word people in that context sounds awkward, but you know, it's this whole thing where just because stories stop or aren't always about humans doesn't mean that they're always about people, because they are always ultimately at the end of the day about people.
Yeah, and stories about people are much easier to form emotional connections to for an audience, and also allow for characters to form stronger connections to each other, which we touched on when we talked about the reason like Geralt is drawn to these people is because just his default goodness and kindness, but also because he has experienced the same things, and that makes him very empathetic. And that is why I think we should segue into talking about his relationships with Yennefer and Ciri. And I guess we can throw in Jaskier if we want.
Listen, I love Dandelion. I also wish I don't remember if I ever looked it up. Really curious about how he ended up in the English version with the name Dandelion. Like, how did we go from Yaskier to?
Well, Jaskier is I think it means like buttercup or something. Like it's a
Oh,
flower.
okay, okay, he was already a flower. May Maybe they just decided, I don't know, Buttercup sounds a little too feminine. Let's call him Dandelion. It's like one iota less feminine.
I don't know
We don't want
exactly
to
what
make
it
him sound
translates to, but
masculine.
it's a flower based name.
I think we definitely do need to talk about him with everyone else because he is not part of the family, but he is the only character who could be called Geralt's best friend. Geralt has very few Geralt has bonds with a lot of people in the story, but I think it's actually easy to say he has very few friends because the vast majority of the people he is friendly with also have strong connections to him regardless of friendship and separate from it, like how ultimately Yennefer and Ciri are family, not friends, and how the other Witchers are his brothers. He was raised with them, worked with them, and colleagues. Whereas Dandelion is, like, the only person he's super close to, who is just his friend,
It's basically just Jaskier slash Dandelion and that
to a
one
lesser
vampire guy.
extent. And, oh, no, I'm forgetting his name, which makes me feel like a dick, but also our little dwarf buddy. Definitely not as close to him
Oh,
as Dandelion,
yes.
but
I knew it, and now it's
Zoltan?
gone.
Is it
Zoltan.
Zoltan?
I
Yeah,
think
I
it
think it
is.
Zoltan's cool, I like him, although he's definitely much more of a regular friend to Geralt, not a super close one.
Yeah. Uh, but I think like one of the reasons that the Jaskier is a good one to point out is that because he is also other,
True.
but he's not other in a way that makes him important or powerful. He's a dorky wandering bard who constantly gets himself in trouble.
He is just a dude who has, dedicated himself to a craft and a love in life that, brings you no power, not much money, and sometimes makes you a target for cruel and selfish people. So, he he's a guy who is other entirely because of who he is, not what he is, ironically, because he's just a guy.
And honestly, the beginning of their relationship isn't particularly friendly. It's almost more about pity.
Oh, Geralt is so annoyed by him and people like him in general at first. It takes time.
Yeah. Uh, to paraphrase someone completely unrelated to The Witcher, he kind of grows on him like a tumor.
Yeah, toss a coin for your Witcher, or to your Witcher.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of the story is in the games. Like the notes about things and the narration, I believe, comes from Dandelion Jaskier.
Yeah, Dandelion is the only person who has enough of Geralt's trust and knows him well enough who tell his story, and also he is a storyteller. So there's that.
Yeah. But I just think it's important to note this because it shows a lot about this the loneliness, the otherness, and the sort of the sort of found family kind of vibe almost going on in The Witcher, where all these people who are very other and outside are drawn to each other and find connections to each other. I think it's important that he is in there because he is not other because of power or whatever. He's just a little weird guy.
Yeah, like I said, he's like the only person I can think of. He others himself. He is other because of who he is, not what. And also relevant, comes into the thing we said before in other episodes that and often, in my opinion, misunderstood aspect of people are always saying show don't tell. And I'm over here like, no, I think it should be show and tell, like the little kids have in school. You should do both.
Yes.
And Dandelion is a great example of that because for the most part, following Geralt can only give us the show, not the tell, because Geralt's not the type of guy to talk about himself or tell his own story.
Yeah, I mean, Jaskier is both useful as someone who doesn't know shit that Geralt can explain things to, making him a useful audience surrogate in his otherness. But he is also just an important addition to this like network of relationships because of his lack of power. It shows us that this situation with Geralt is because he is a good person, not because he is trying to be in a position of power or because he just is in a position of power. Jaskier is an essential character to showing us who Geralt is as a person.
Then we have the family, a sweet little nuclear family.
Where do we want to
I
start with that? I mean, we touched on Yennefer a bit already.
it's a tangled web they're weaved into. Um, I think it's probably good to go with Siri first. So we touched on the thing earlier. I'm still mad that I can't remember, but like the unknown promise, the gift of what will be. None of these are the correct title, but they all kind of describe what it is.
Remind me actually
Um,
before we get to that, is Ciri also born under the eclipse? I
I
don't think
don't
I
think. No, no, she's
I'm
not.
not
She's too
sure.
young.
Yeah,
She's too young. Everyone else who was born under the eclipse is older than her.
that's what I thought. It's just that
But
because of who she is, it's very easy to mistake her for that possibly, but
yeah, so Siri is very special, possibly the most special person in this entire world, in that she is someone born with what is called elder blood, which means she is more or less someone who was, for whatever reason, chosen by the universe to be born with the power of like the ancient, not even necessarily material beings who could like completely, how do I put this? They are the only beings in the world of pure power. So, an interesting thing they do, most sorcerers and sorceresses in this world are called that because people who are born with innate, inherent magical power are called sources because they are the only people in the world who are themselves a source of power. Because, for the most part, people don't have power. We grow power or we take it. Sources are the only people who are just powerful. Um, as far as humanity goes, at least. And someone with elder blood is a special type of source who is essentially pure power. Sources have the ability to use and manipulate that power. Elder blood is that power. Siri could inherently has the ability to manipulate reality for all intents and purposes, not just cast spells like actual mages and stuff do.
to be clear, this goes to the extent where Siri has the potential to be able to move between planes of existence the same way that monsters got deposited in the world of The Witcher.
And could actually even cause her own cataclysmic level events just on her own power if the
Or
right
could
conditions were
possibly
met.
solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and it's this is where the law of promise, which is just what I'm going to call it until I remember what it's actually called, comes in. where I wish I could remember the exact story. I just wish my memory was better because these are stories I've gone over and knew at one point. But one of the deals Geralt went on once involved helping somebody who they couldn't pay him. So to fit the rules of The Witcher, he got them to get that law of promise, and they made a promise to give him something they had not yet received. And eventually that led its way to a young little girl named Cyrilla of Sintra, the scion of a destroyed, decimated kingdom with elder blood and the mixed national royal blood of a dead nation and a thriving, conquering empire in her veins.
Basically falling under his care because they had to give Siri to him.
That's right.
Which
Okay, I was close. It's the law of surprise.
that's right. It was like something about the timing basically meant that, Siri was under his care.
Yeah, the law of surprise is literally I mean, we described it as an IOU earlier, but that's very much literally what it is.
Yeah.
It's one person being saved by another and being like, "Well, I can't give you anything right now, but I want to. I will give you something in the future." And the universe more or less literally makes that a verbal contract.
Basically, though, he ends up with Siri under his care in some very dramatic circumstances. Not necessarily something he wants to do, but it's not like he can just toss her away because not only is he just a good person who could not possibly do that, but also the universe has ordained that he's not allowed. And that's the start of their relationship. But obviously, there is a lot of parallels between them. They are both targets because they are other and because they are powerful. They are both people that others want to manipulate and control on one hand, or remove as a threat on another. Which means that Geralt is in a position to not only empathize with Ciri a lot and become a sort of father figure because he gets it, but also because he is a person of skill and power in this world, he is in a position where he can help her learn, perhaps not fully to master her gifts that are beyond him, but certainly to protect herself and look after herself.
Yeah, especially because unlike him and many of the other people in similar situations to them, Siri isn't just somebody that some people want dead or under control or both. Everybody wants her. She is such a massive, pivotal figure to so many people that without someone like Geralt protecting her, she is guaranteed not to be allowed to live her life under any sort of agency.
If she gets to live at all.
Yeah.
Because being powerful does not make you invulnerable.
Yeah, and even with as strong as she
especially when
is,
that power
there
sorry, especially when that power is not at all under your control.
yeah, and she just has too much power targeting her and coming after her. And of by the way, side note, I only just learned, Geralt actually, coincidentally got Ciri through the Law of Surprise twice, actually. First as a baby when he invoked it on, her father who didn't even know her mother was pregnant with her yet,
Yeah.
and once again later when he invoked it on a merchant who couldn't pay him, and the merchant didn't know that his wife had taken Ciri into their home to shelter her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "That's I had no idea." It's so funny. It's like the that's actually the strongest example I could ever think of, like, the fucking meme of, like, "Man, if I had a nickel for every time I invoked the law of surprise, I'd have 2 nickels, but it's weird that it happened twice."
But yeah, so they, of course, end up in a somewhat uncomfortable at first because Geralt doesn't want to be a father figure and Ciri doesn't want to be controlled relationship of more mentor and reluctant mentor, reluctant learner that eventually grows into a more sort of father surrogate child situation where they both come to care very deeply from each other about each other and have things they can learn from each other. and also things they've gotta get over together. And I mean,
Yeah.
who doesn't love a found family? It's always such a good vibe.
Yeah, and, you know, most found families we see in these situations are, like, platonic too, and part of what's sweet here is Geralt doesn't just become family with both Ciri and Yennefer, or all 3 of them become family together, but, like, him and Yennefer fall in love deeper and deeper, and they both also parentally and separately fall in love with Ciri together to really become, like, the closest little triangle of a family you can.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of core, this bizarre little family with their tag-along jester, basically, um, become the core of all of Geralt's story, all of The Witcher. And that is, again, this very relatable human element to this otherwise extremely fantastical story that not only grounds it a little bit in our own experience, but makes it easier to relate to, but just makes it a more poignant, powerful connection to the audience in general. And speaking of members of that family, let's go back to Yennefer because
Yes.
we gotta explain how she kind of fits into this situation because it's complicated. For starters, Yennefer, unlike Ciri and Geralt, begins her journey powerless. She is disfigured, a second-class citizen, unwanted by her family, basically horribly abused, but has find is given this chance at power through the lodge, a chance to be someone through the lodge, to become magically powerful, politically powerful, physically beautiful. And naturally, she snatches onto that. She goes through all of the bullshit in the lodge, all the deceit, the backstabbing, the sort of twisted experiments.
Turns out she's quite good at it.
Turns out she's really good at it, and she comes out at the other end of it as a powerful sorceress who gets involved in these political situations, who gets to wield all this power, and it's intoxicating to her because she not only has
Yeah.
that magic in her now that makes her want it just by default, but also she's a person who had nothing who can now have basically anything, and it's like a
Yeah,
drug.
she's got the perfect convocation of natural human greed, the want of something it never had for somebody who couldn't be farther away from it, and the inherent will to power of magic all mushing together. And one of the things that's interesting about Yennefer and sets her apart from many of the other sorceresses of the lodge, you could actually argue she's even greedier than the rest of them. It's just that she's not as interested in political power. Yennefer's greed and desire for power is her critical flaw, even among sorcerers, in that she gets herself into situations that are bad and dumb and could get her killed multiple times purely because she keeps seeking more. She's never satisfied. She never has
Like,
enough.
pissing off a genie.
Yeah, like literally trying to control a genie, the most powerful, like,
Vindictive.
being you can think of. A being so powerful that in this world of limitations and gritty realism mixed with fantasy, genies jinns, I should
Oh,
say,
yeah.
genuinely can grant any wish and do anything. But as goes with the old stories, being trapped and having amazing power that you're only allowed to use in service to others can make you pretty bitter and vindictive, which means if you're not careful with your wishes and use them exactly right, jinns are gonna fuck you up. And on top of that, only one person can be a jinn's master. And Yennefer was so eager to get control of a jinn's power, separate from making wishes, that she misunderstood who this jinn's master was. Little did she know, it was Geralt's.
Not by any intent of his own.
He didn't know either. Yeah. But, long story short, we can't get into the whole thing because it's a whole story, but yeah, they This is, I think, a while after, um, Geralt and they had already met
They had, yeah.
before, but they weren't really together yet. The attraction was there, I'm sure. I'm sure there was, like, a little bit of feelings, but also Geralt definitely wasn't in love with her yet 'cause, it's hard for him to fall in love with someone who's like this. She is many of the things he hates about sorceresses and powerful people at the time, as far as he's aware.
Fortunately slash unfortunately for them, the situation with the djinn resolves itself by basically binding them together through fate.
Yeah, Geralt realizes through various context clues that it is actually him who is technically the Jinn's master. And when the Jinn is about to take its unholy or probably eternal vengeance on Yennefer for trying to control it, he wishes for them to be for him and Yennefer to be bound, have their fates bound together for all time, which you could say, well, how does that protect her? Because there is only one rule that Jinns really, really are stuck to and cannot wiggle around or try to be technical and monkey's paw about, and that's that a Jinn may not do any sort of harm to its master. And by making it so that hurting Yennefer would hurt Geralt, can't do shit to her.
Obviously, this also, like, magnifies that connection, that attraction, and things like that, and they end up in a sort of toxic on-off romance.
Yeah, and you always get this interesting thing of like not knowing 100% which parts of their relationship to attribute to them supposedly being connected by fate and which parts to attribute to really just who they are and natural
And they
development,
don't know
because
either.
like this was an amazing thing that did not only bind them together through the spell but bind them together because Yennefer was touched. She's never seen anything but like the selfishness and greed of humanity, and Geralt just tied himself up, which what with what for him at the time is a nuisance for potentially the rest of his life, just to save somebody who he probably didn't like very much at the time.
Yes, so this creates this really interesting dynamic where they are not only involved in this really, at first, quite toxic situation where they love each other but don't like each other. Uh, and Yennefer can't help but manipulate Geralt because it's who she is. It also is sort of the catalyst for a unfortunate realization for Yennefer, which is she lunged for that power because she was powerless and she was desperate to no longer be oppressed, but realized, oh shit, it was human connection that I was actually really desperate for. And I can't have that. I cannot. I can't even physically have a family because the one thing I had to give up for this power and this physical beauty was my ability to have children.
Yeah. By the way, basically everybody who's not a pure human in this world is oh no, I'm forgetting the word. Uh I can't remember the word for someone who can't have kids.
Infertile?
No, there's a more specific one. I think it starts with a C.
They got nothing.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being stupid. It's one of those things of my brain trying to reach for a very specific word and just failing. But yeah, he like witchers and sorceresses both. Um, I don't actually remember what the reason that sorceresses can't have kids is.
I mean, because you have it's because it's part one, isn't it one of the rules of of the universe? You have to give something out up of significance to get power. I
Could
think
be.
it's something
It
like
could. Yeah,
that.
it
It's like
could.
it costs life almost to will that kind of power. So to get the kind of power the sorceresses have, you basically have to give up all of this future life.
Which, by the way, is one of the big reasons. You see very few sorcerers and mostly sorceresses. I'm pretty sure in the world of The Witcher, sorceresses are inherently like women who become magical and go all the way with those rituals and stuff are inherently significantly more powerful than the men most of the time because they give up the ability to create
Yeah.
life. And men don't have that to begin with.
Well,
It's not
kinda.
something we can give up. We don't.
But in
Well, yes and
in the
no. Like,
narrative romanticized sense, they do not have the ability to, like, to create life because they can't carry it within themselves like that.
They have the physical ability to carry and develop and grow
Yeah,
life within them. We have the men have the ability to donate a little bit
yeah.
of life.
Which I mean, I'm reaching
Um,
a bit. I don't remember super clearly, but I think that's how it works with the whole situation.
so yeah, if you think of it as the idea of giving something up, especially giving up an aspect of life or a part of life, women have a much more powerful and significant part of that to physically and conceptually give up, which grants them great power.
Which is kind of Yennefer's trajectory because there is an open slot in a newly found family where she kind of fits perfectly if she could just get over some of her shit.
If she could just stop being such a jerk to others and herself, because it's funny. Uh, you don't often see characters who are done so well in this aspect of that. Yennefer genuinely is a good person deep down, but also for a long time she just sucks. She's mean, selfish, greedy, manipulative. Like, she's a good person underneath all that, but that's a lot of layers to dig through to get to the
It's many
good.
books, games, seasons of TV worth of peeling those layers back to get her back to that good person she started as.
Yeah. Which, is a shame for people who only play The Witcher games because you're really missing some context for who Yennefer is when you start The Witcher 3, since I don't remember if it's a rights thing or what. She has no presence at all whatsoever in the first 2, and in the first 2 games, Triss is there snatching up all of Geralt's attention and affection all the time, which is a good thing to come up later because, I didn't learn until I started looking into more stuff, a while back that, in the books, there is no significant relationship really between Triss and Geralt. She likes him, he doesn't give a crap about her, and she kind of sucks, which
She's
means
part
if
of the
you go
lodge,
with
of
what
course
happens in the
she's
games, but that means, like, in the context of the games, she is literally taking advantage of Geralt's amnesia to get with him and get into his pants
yeah,
too.
which is incredibly fucked. And when Witcher 3 gives you the chance to pick Yennefer or Triss, why the hell you would pick Triss after that, I don't know.
It falls into this really weird point, right? Where it's like that's why it kinda sucks for people who've only
Because they
played the
don't have the
games,
context of
because
all that other stuff of who the hell Yennefer
you've been
is.
seeing Triss and Geralt develop this relationship, you've been seeing them be there for each other and then grow closer, and without the context, it's hard to quantify the fact that, like, yeah, but she did all that in, like, the most manipulative, selfish way you possibly could, and for her own selfish reasons. Like, it's it's
Yeah,
awful. It's awful. And like, and listen,
but it's very human.
I like Triss. I like Triss. She's better now. She is a much better person than she used to be. That doesn't entitle her to Geralt's love.
She's just a female nice guy.
She very much is, which is why I really like the option in The Witcher 3 of helping her save the other mages and get them out of Novigrad and whatever, and saying goodbye to her right then and there. Or alternatively, I mean, you know, you could she could be helpful and useful at Kaer Morhen, but it's so let's just stay friends, okay?
I mean, it's a hell of a character arc for Triss becoming someone who genuinely tries to save people for no other reason than they need saving. For Yennefer, stripping away all this greed and like power hungriness that she's learned when she realizes what she really needed and wanted. Uh, for Geralt becoming a father figure and just kind of just a guy in a way, and finally moving past the Witcher baggage, then learning to give Ciri some freedom to do what she needs to do to fill the role she is supposed to be in and let her come into herself. Like there I mean, it goes without saying, there is so much there in such a massive, sprawling franchise. We've not even touched on the vampires. We've not, or the sisters, or Roach, or the elf guy whose name I've
Man, yeah, there's
forgotten.
so much to go into. I've said this about other stuff we've covered before, but one of the problems with talking about The Witcher in a single podcast episode is you could have an entire
Yeah,
podcast that was just The
for
Witcher.
sure. But the one thing that is the consistent core, the key through all of this is that it is a story. The stories are always about people, about quotation marks, human relationships, about how different people interact and play off of each other. Those are always the central elements of the story. To the point where a lot of the monsters and curses that Geralt deals with are just symptomatic of human flaws rather than directly the problems themselves.
Yeah. The greatest thing about the monsters and stuff in The Witcher is the same thing that's the greatest about, like that's why fairy tales are so appealing. It's because none of it is just made up stuff that is exactly what it is in the story. It's all metaphors, analogies. They all have connections to the real world and to real people and the things we feel and experience and do.
And it's that human dramatic element that makes The Witcher so good and so much more than if it was just watching this, chiseled guy stabbing a hydra or a basilisk or whatever every book or every episode or whatever. And I think it is a very good example to go off of if you're looking to improve your own writing as a fantasy writer. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I want people to come out of this cycle in general with is stripping away this often misinformed idea of what drama is, uh, as we talked about back in episode one, but also understanding how that human element elevates these other stories to be something greater than they would be if it was just about the plot. Because more than any cycle we've ever done before, this one very much embodies the idea that we keep preaching and will continue to do so no matter how much you beg us to stop. It doesn't matter how good your plot is if your characters aren't what drives the story.
Yeah, because there's nothing people really care about and obviously empathize with deep down than people. Stories are about people, for people, by people, and speak to people.
Exactly. But as much as we could go so much deeper into that just within the context of The Witcher, our time is pretty much up. So we will leave that there with just an encouragement to pick whether it's the TV series, the slash Netflix series, but especially the games and the books. If you've not experienced The Witcher, do so because there is a lot to learn there and a lot to enjoy there. For now, though, until our next episode, we'll leave it there. As always, you can find me on my site, radfordwrites.com. That's probably where you're listening to this. It's also on Spotify and YouTube, but I know where my audience mostly is. Of course, you could also find
Mhm.
stories, blog articles, and the like there. There is more podcast stuff coming in the future. You can also find links to buy my books, which I always appreciate people doing. And as for John, you can find him on Twitch and YouTube streaming as Sephia, Sephear.
Yeah, I'm working.
He does that. And whilst he does that, we will leave you there. Don't curse anyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye.